Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Sekulow.
The president gave an address to the United Nations just moments ago, literally, as we're coming to you live. The two that are always the most anticipated, at least for the media, are the presidents and the Prime Minister of Israel.
That's usually, and for our media here in the United States, that's where the focus goes, because you will see a lot of controversy surrounding the Prime Minister of Israel's remarks in the crowd at the United Nations General Assembly inside the building. And then, of course, we want to see our president kind of lay out the foreign policy issues that are most important. But also, what we're doing is seeing our president speak to the world. This is a unique time when it's not the president just addressing the nation. He does that, he addresses our nation regularly.
Right.
This is an address to the world and world leaders. That's his audience there. And, of course, there are things for everybody to pay attention to who are Americans, to understand the thought processes going behind our foreign policy. But this is really a statement to the world on where America is going in 2018, 2019, and where are they focused. And we're seeing a lot of focus on Iran. We're seeing, again, the focus on the Middle East, the region of the world that is, again, still in the most turmoil. And then, obviously, a lot of economics. We haven't gotten into all that. There's a lot of economic focus in this speech as well. And the idea, the America First idea, but also saying you should be doing this in your own country too.
Yeah.
You should be looking out for your own people's interests. Stop just joining these global institutions and letting them decide for you your trade deals.
Harry, what would you say that you took as the biggest takeaway from the speech?
Well, among other things, one of the biggest takeaways that I took is the rejection by President Trump of the advice and the approach taken by globalists. Globalists are quite willing to prop up horrendous regimes, for instance, like the Iranian regime, the #1 state sponsor of terror. And so the question then becomes, how does that approach advance human rights? Kumbaya is not a solution. Maximum pressure and principled realism is a solution. So the president offered a clear message to global elites who are often willing to trade human lives in pursuit of the illusion that all of the world's leaders are actually interested in peace rather than expanding terror. And so one of the messages that was clear to the world and to global leaders was we are rejecting past approaches that have failed with respect to Iran, with respect to Syria, and with respect to any regime that plunders its people's hopes and dreams instead of advancing true peace going forward.
America is governed by Americans. That's what the president said. Listen to this.
America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
I mean, this is in contradistinction. I mean, this is the complete opposite, Van, of the way the previous administration addressed the world. We were all part of this, global world, which, of course, we are part of a global world, but we are protecting here our sovereignty and our ability to determine our own fate. It was very strong and very much in distinction in the previous administration.
Well, and quite frankly, Jay, that approach is necessary if you want to restore American leadership around the world. I mean, the president, I thought, he backed that up by saying if a program is not helpful not only to the world but to American interests like UNRWA, like the Human Rights Council, we are not going to go along with it just because decades of tradition say that we have to. At the same time, Jay, he issued the red lines for Syria. We've heard red lines before, but I think the rest of the world knows that this president now means it and won't dare cross it. So again, American leadership in the world, Jay, if you can be resolved to restore that, but unless you're committed to back it up with words, it won't go very far. This president will back it up, and I think the world knows it.
We've got a lot more ahead to discuss on this issue. The president gave a major speech at the UN, a lot of it focusing on the Middle East, and specifically Israel, Iran, and the whole region. We've got a petition up that says simply this: stop funding Israel's enemies. We encourage you to sign that. You can do that. There's a number on your screen. You can certainly do it there, or simply go to aclj.org. That's aclj.org to stand with Israel. We encourage you to do that today. Back with more in just a moment.
Millions of your taxpayer dollars are being funneled to jihadists at war with Israel. The terrorist-led Palestinian Authority uses $300 million a year to pay Palestinians carrying out terrorist attacks against Israel. We're paying for this. We funnel over 700 million taxpayer dollars to the Palestinian Authority and related entities each year. In fact, the UN has created a new $65 million taxpayer-funded anti-Israel slush fund to prop up the Palestinian Authority's legal war against Israel. This funding must end. We're aggressively fighting on Capitol Hill, at the United Nations, and in international courts to defend Israel. This is a critical moment. We need your voice now. Israel needs your voice now. Sign on to our petition. Stop funding terrorists at war with Israel. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online, aclj.org.
Hey, the president went to the United Nations today. We're taking your calls on this.
Andrew's been holding on line one in Florida. Andrew, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Jay. How are you?
Great.
And the rest of the crew there. Hi, guys.
Thanks.
I just wanted to switch gears ever so slightly. I wanted to get your opinion or your take on why is it when other world leaders spout rhetoric about how they're going to run their country and how they're going to bomb America or whatever the case may be, but then when our President Trump, doing such a fantastic job for our country, when he starts to tell the world what we're going to do and how we are not going to engage them in their personal issues and how we want to stay out of their business if they stay out of ours and we won't bother them. Why is he suddenly under such scrutiny?
Well,
to the point that that Nikki Haley is basically bashing him from what I read this morning in the news.
I think when you listen to his speech and you actually see the way that speech was received, and I'm watching some of the other networks that are reporting on it, look, they're playing up the facts that he said we reject globalism, we embrace patriotism. But, those countries do too. Their leaders do, a lot of these countries. A lot of them do not reject globalism, however. So, they'll come up with their phrase. The president was focusing on America first, rejecting globalism, putting our interests first, but also sending messages to the world that we're not going to tolerate chemical weapons, for instance, as the previous administration did, being used on innocent people. Having said that, he does not want to engage on every single issue that comes up. And one of the statements he makes, and I think this is it's number 22, puts this into, I think this is a Trump doctrine, if you will. Here it is.
America will always choose independence and cooperation over global governance, control, and domination. I honor the right of every nation in this room to pursue its own customs, beliefs, and traditions. The United States will not tell you how to live or work or worship. We only ask that you honor our sovereignty in return.
So I think that's A, correct, and B, the right policy to move forward in that venue. So that was the venue to say this. Now, having said that, I've been to that podium. I have addressed that. I've made an address in the General Assembly room on the boycott, divest, and sanction issue for Israel. So, it's an incredible experience, and more so when you've got every world leader there, as the president does. But the president also rejected the ICC, the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction. Now, there are a handful of lawyers in the world that have appeared before the ICC. I love this when we get criticized. What do the Sekulow and his team know about international law or the law of armed conflict? Well, I always respond back to those lawyers. How many of you have appeared before the office of the prosecutor, on multiple occasions, by the way, at the International Criminal Court in The Hague? Because Jordan and I have, with a team, we've been there. Here's what the president said about the ICC.
As far as America is concerned, the ICC has no jurisdiction, no legitimacy, and no authority. The ICC claims near universal jurisdiction over the citizens of every country, violating all principles of justice, fairness, and due process. We will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy.
All right. This is very, very important. I want you to put in context here. Rejects the ICC's universal jurisdiction, which is a position we have advocated. Violating principles of justice and due process. I've seen those hearings. By the way, we were successful in ours, but I've seen those hearings. You've seen those hearings. This is not due process that we understand or expect in here. And we're not going to surrender our sovereignty to a group of world judges. That's what that is.
We have the greatest legal system in the world. I think the most fair, with the most due process presented, because it's constitutionally guaranteed to the people. This is honestly a system where, if you were to allow, and the Obama administration was getting there, not fully there, but certainly not attacking the ICC, this court to run, have any kind of jurisdiction over the United States or our allies, it would just be serious trouble. You'd be letting the world try our soldiers, try Americans, whenever they disagreed with our foreign policy decisions. And so whatever the purposes were behind the creation of the ICC, like most international institutions, and these, they serve a much better purpose at temporary. I think when you have a war crimes tribunal for a specific event that occurred or a genocide that occurred, that can be successful, and you can back something like that. So what we saw specifically, that's where the international community has been successful, going back again to the days of World War II and following World War II. Specific tribunals for specific events. This general kind of jurisdiction to criminalize whatever they feel like criminalizing, first of all, has been horrible for developing nations where they've really focused on, because the superpowers have been able to ignore them. Right. And I mean that is that Russia's not involved, the U.S. not involved, Israel's not involved. Basically, the countries that do support it, they support it for political purposes. Yep.
So, Harry, what is your when the president talks about the global jurisdiction, globalism generally, and the lack of the United States willing to engage that, I take that as a positive.
That's very, very important. It's important to note that many globalists, including U.S. State Department officials, are often apologists for the United States and for American values and America's role in the world. They are prepared to downgrade American interests and to elevate the grievances of other countries. President Trump rightly rejects this approach. By doing so, he advances justice and due process and the rule of law. The United States then becomes a beacon, a role model for the rest of the world. So emphasizing U.S. sovereignty, I think, is very, very important.
Eric in New Mexico, online for Eric. Welcome to Sekulow Live.
Hi, Eric.
Hi, guys. I just want to take a minute to thank you all for everything that you do. I support the ACLJ.
Great. Thank you.
Second of all, I just want to make the comment. I mean, it's so nice to have a president that puts America first and who's not afraid to put the world on notice. It's about time. It's been too long.
So Fan Bennett talked about that earlier, and the stark contrast between the two. That was an interesting call, Eric. How do you see that? I mean, there was clearly a defined task here. Three things you just kind of take away. America first. We are going to insist on human rights, that we're not going to let other countries have their people gassed or chemical weapons being utilized. That's kind of the line that this president seems to engage on that. Doesn't want to get into internal squabbles, doesn't want to get into internal civil wars, but is not going to sit by while people are gassed in chemical weapons by dictators. And the third thing you saw, when, of course, he mentioned it's interesting because he mentions he does not want unelected, unaccountable global bureaucrats engage this. Now, I wrote a book called Undemocratic that had which the subtitle was Unelected Bureaucrats, Unaccountable Bureaucrats that kind of run roughshod on it. And you could take that to a global scale as well. And you've seen it firsthand because you've been to the UN.
Well, when you made those comments, Jay, the first thing that came to mind was your book, because that was one of the reasons I know that motivated you to write it, is the actions that we saw at the United Nations, and we did not want our bureaucracy to follow suit. But, it is 180 degrees from the foreign policy of the last administration. That, I think, that policy was fair to describe as one of appeasement, where now it's a policy of strength. It's not meddling, but it's American leadership through strength. And the other thing, Jay, that struck me, I think when the American president took that lectern, in many administrations in the past, the rest of the world didn't pay that much attention because they didn't think there would be follow-through. But this president, whether it's the Jerusalem embassy or removing the United States from UNRWA or withdrawing from the Iran deal or pulling back Palestinian funds. Jay, he has told the world in advance what he will do, and then what has he done? He's followed through. So to Jordan's point about anticipating the American president's speech, I think more than ever before, because those in that chamber know the words that come out of his mouth are going to be followed up by actions.
Yeah, the tariffs, the renegotiated trade deal, the sanctions. I mean, the targeted sanctions, the more widespread sanctions, the upcoming sanctions on Iran that kick in. How we have treated China, but at the same time, the trade deal we just signed yesterday with South Korea that increased a lot of things. It was a big surprise was that it increased also our auto exports into South Korea. That was not necessarily something that a lot of experts thought was on the table even.
Yep.
And it was more focused on farm and kind of the foods and things like that. And instead also included a doubling of the number of U.S. cars that can go in per manufacturer into the South Korean economy. So there are positives, steps that they have taken, renegotiating trade deals, and then there are the again approaches that you take, the punishments. And if you see the tariffs on China, fighting to get China to the table, these are real. These are happening as we speak. It is not a threat. So when the president speaks about something he is considering, he has a record now of when he says that acting on it. So now everyone knows that these words he uses at the UN are action items that will be acted on in the
Well, I think you saw that with the Kim Jong-un statement in the beginning and from last year and then where we are today. You saw that with Israel and then moved on the capital, Jerusalem. All of that is very, very real. We've got a lot more ahead to discuss on this issue. The president gave a major speech at the UN, a lot of it focusing on the Middle East, and specifically Israel, Iran, and the whole region. We've got a petition up that says simply this: stop funding Israel's enemies. We encourage you to sign that. You can do that. There's a number on your screen. You can certainly do it there, or simply go to aclj.org. That's aclj.org to stand with Israel. We encourage you to do that today. Back with more in just a moment.
Millions of your taxpayer dollars are being funneled to jihadists at war with Israel. The terrorist-led Palestinian Authority uses $300 million a year to pay Palestinians carrying out terrorist attacks against Israel. We're paying for this. We funnel over $700 million taxpayer dollars to the Palestinian Authority and related entities each year. In fact, the UN has created a new $65 million taxpayer-funded anti-Israel slush fund to prop up the Palestinian Authority's legal war against Israel. This funding must end. We're aggressively fighting on Capitol Hill, at the United Nations, and in international courts to defend Israel. This is a critical moment. We need your voice now. Israel needs your voice now. Sign on to our petition. Stop funding terrorists at war with Israel. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online, aclj.org.
In the last 7 years, the Middle East went through an earthquake.
Today, the group Hamas declared a day of rage, urging attacks on Israelis.
If you step back and look at the picture, you can see the circle enclosing around Israel.
This conflict has never been about establishing a Palestinian state. It's always been about the existence of a Jewish state.
Jewish wedding in Israel interrupted by air raid sirens.
Human shielding pays today.
Why did you put the rocket there, next to the school? That's the person that committed a crime against humanity.
BDS is a new form of anti-Semitism. The call to boycott the state of Israel, to divest investment from the state of Israel.
The conception of this is to destroy Israel by turning Israel into an oppressor and using all these different instrumentalities, not just warfare on the battlefield, but lawfare.
When they say that Israel should be wiped out, that they mean it?
I don't have the luxury not to believe it.
Your reaction to the president's speech. Let's go ahead and take a phone call, Jordan.
Yeah, Joy in Alabama on line 3. Joy, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hi, Joy. Go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to say that today when I listened to the president's speech, just as a normal person, an American. I'm not anyone outstanding of any caliber as far as a high-ranking official. But also in those people could be high-ranking officials, whether they be in government or business, other countries, other leaders. What I heard him say was to all people that we should all be like a sovereign nation, that we should be proud of our cultures, and that we should be able to live our lives. And I like that he leveled it, not just that we're better or they're worse or
no, it's to respect the sovereignty of the various countries, but he also at the same time he said that and he meant that. And I think that's a good strategy and a good policy. But he also put on notice Syria that if you use let's get this soundbite ready. So while he wanted to respect sovereignty and wanted to understand that we're not going to be stuck by old dogmas and failed policies, when it came down to Syria and red lines and chemical weapons, this president was unapologetic in the way in which he put that forward. So when you look at that, you look at what he said about Syria in that context, it was very direct. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
The ongoing tragedy in Syria is heartbreaking. Our shared goals must be the de-escalation of military conflict, along with a political solution that honors the will of the Syrian people. In this vein, we urge the United Nations-led peace process be reinvigorated. But rest assured, the United States will respond if chemical weapons are deployed by the Assad regime.
So the red line is chemical weapons. He's already taken action when that's happened in the past. But he also said the will of the people of Syria to be fulfilled.
Yeah, so I think that is to make sure that they have representation that is not Iranian mullah-led, that is not necessarily the Assad regime, that the U.S., we know this is one of the most complicated conflicts ongoing right now in the world. We have basically eliminated, I think as the president said, 85% of ISIS. So ISIS is playing a less important role, but that vacuum has been filled by others like Iran and Russia, who are backing strongly the Assad regime. Can you get to actual peace and prosperity and a back to even a Syria that can be rebuilt while that is ongoing? No, you cannot. I mean, there's still massive civil war, destruction of entire towns, cities, not just villages, by the way, cities, major infrastructure completely wiped out. So I think it's a long-term strategy that has to look at, one, our interest, and then two, the interest of the Syrian people, but being cautious when you do that, because right now, I mean, there are still a lot of factions there, even outside the Assad regime, that are pretty dangerous.
The second half hour, I want to get into this globalism issue a little bit more. But Harry, what was your reaction to the president on the Syria issue? His entire speech theme was respect sovereignty, but he clearly laid down a marker as it relates to Syria, that another utilization of chemical weapons will be met with action.
Absolutely. So it's clear that the use of chemical weapons is a violation of international law, but equally clear, the president is emphasizing something that the prior administration could not, and that is the president is a man of his word. This sends a clear and unmistakable message to both our enemies and allies alike, so that there are clear red lines going forward. I think Jordan is absolutely correct. The Syrian situation is very, very complex with Iran, with Russia, and other groups involved in Syria. But it's also important that we send a message to Syria, that we send a message to Russia, that there are red lines. That is helpful in protecting one of our allies, Israel, going forward. So I think the president, again, has emphasized that he is a man of his word, and that's very, very important going forward.
Let's go right back to the phones. Shirley in Florida, online too. Shirley, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hi, Shirley. You're on the air.
Hi. It's great to talk to you guys. I really love everything you do for all of us.
Thank you
very much.
Yep.
I thought the speech that he made was fabulous, and it's about time that the whole world stepped up and did their part in keeping peace on the planet. And I'm really disappointed. I never hear anything from China or Russia in support of all this. Why are we not hearing anything?
Look, I mean, it was a muted response on China and Russia because there's the bilateral, trilateral negotiations going on here. And I think look, when you only have 40 minutes to speak. So I think the president went about 40 minutes. That is, there's only so much you can cover. So, but that doesn't mean there's not meetings going on. But it's not so much what they say, Than. It's also what these countries actually do.
Well, and it's also what we do behind the scenes as well, Jay. I mean, look, the president has been very consistent with his call, not only for contributions to the UN, but also contributions to other programs. And let me just give one small example. There is a program called the UN Development Program, which is supposed to support something that Jordan was talking about, the resettlement of refugees who have been displaced by ISIS and others. Jay, this administration has told the rest of the world, I'm pulling back a big contribution that the United States is making to that program because you all aren't supporting it as you should. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to send it directly to the Christian and Yazidi communities that have been displaced by this. That is a way he has backed up the words he gave today, Jay, with action on the ground. So as it relates to China, if they don't come to the table and contribute in a like fashion, the president will just keep pulling the United States dollars back and allocating them directly.
It was interesting that the president had this statement. The Iranian people, again, this is drawing a distinction between the Iranian regime and the Iranian people, are rightly outraged that their leaders have embezzled billions of dollars from Iran's treasury. Let me play for you soundbite 31.
The Iranian people are rightly outraged that their leaders have embezzled billions of dollars from Iran's treasury, seized valuable portions of the economy, and looted the people's religious endowments, all to line their own pockets and send their proxies to wage war. Not good.
That is from the President of the United States speaking at the United Nations. Strong words on the Iranian regime. Well, that's going to do it for the broadcast. Again, we've got a petition that's up right now, and we encourage you to really be part of it. And that is, we shouldn't be sending our taxpayer dollars to those that are harming or intending to harm Israel. The enemies of Israel should not be funded by the United States or, frankly, the United Nations. You can join that petition at aclj.org or call the number that's on your screen to stand with Israel, aclj.org. Again, that does it for the broadcast this week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Millions of your taxpayer dollars are being funneled to jihadists at war with Israel. The terrorist-led Palestinian Authority uses $300 million a year to pay Palestinians carrying out terrorist attacks against Israel. We're paying for this. We funnel over $700 million taxpayer dollars to the Palestinian Authority and related entities each year. In fact, the UN has created a new $65 million taxpayer-funded anti-Israel slush fund to prop up the Palestinian Authority's legal war against Israel. This funding must end. We're aggressively fighting on Capitol Hill, at the United Nations, and in international courts to defend Israel. This is a critical moment. We need your voice now. Israel needs your voice now. Sign on to our petition. Stop funding terrorists at war with Israel. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online, aclj.org.